it'll be okay. Every period had issues with it. You hear my kids talking to you at some point. Because as I was recording it, Harper goes like, "Who are you talking to?" Talking to my students. "Hi, Daddy, students." "Can I watch Paw Patrol?" "Yeah, go ahead." Actually, I think she was watching PJ Masks, but all right, so before we get cracking on this, I want to talk about this week a little bit. What's going down. So, anybody on the basketball team? My plan is for us to have a tea party on Wednesday. Yes, ma'am.
It's like, section 1, though it's like long, like 8 fit on one page.
I don't know, depends on how big you write, I guess.
You don't write very big till you have something.
There you go. So the tea party, right? We're going to do it most likely up here. Since it's a smaller class, we can answer the problem. What I am going to be doing is I'm going to be providing hot water as well as black plain tea bags and lemonade. So you guys can have any of that. If you want to bring hot cocoa mix, so you can make your own hot cocoa, that's fine too. The thing you guys are all responsible for is everybody needs to bring a snack to share with everybody else. Now that being said, you don't have to bring 14 of everything. Everyone brings 14 of everything. That's a lot of food. And why you guys might be all like, "Challenge accepted." I'm just saying, we don't need leftovers. But do whatever you want. Now, you might be asking, what should I bring? There's all kinds of options. Honestly, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. If you want to go bake cookies, that's perfect. If you want to go buy off-count cookies or something like that at the program, that's perfect, fine too. If people bring Little Debbie snack cakes, that works. Really, most tea stuff tends to be sweet. Now, that's not true necessarily always historically, but nowadays that tends to be the case. Actually, there's quite a few examples historically of this. For instance, there was a dish that was served at teas that was essentially a small cake that would be made using batter put in a teacup and baked. And then these cakes would be frosted like any other cake, and they were called fairy cakes. Now, we call them a different name today because they're made in cups. We call them cupcakes. So cupcakes are a perfect example as well. Now, the other thing is there's also savories. That's, it's covered with sweets. Savories are also an option. Probably the most famous and infamous, if you want to go this would be my guess, little tiny cucumber sandwiches. Also spread sandwiches like pimento cheese and bacon. In addition, there's things like little sausage and cheese plates, maybe like summer sausage cut up and cheese with that's very much a tea thing with crackers. The idea is something that you can put on one plate with your tea and your sauce around it. That's the idea. That's where it comes from. Yeah.
Did you say you could keep those in bake?
No, that's not what I said.
Where do we put this stuff? Like, can we bring it in the morning?
Yes, that's perfectly acceptable. You're the first person to ask that all day, so I'm glad we're recording this, so people can hear that. Now, the idea is I'm going to try to clear everything off of here, like a sideboard, and then I might have another table set up over here, so we can kind of differentiate between the various classes. Yeah?
Can we make the desk smooth? Is it a circle?
Like with a wand, or?
No,
but
I said that
So if you can, go right ahead.
Can we move on so that it's not boring and we can...
Yes, that's fine. That's what you mean.
Sit in a circle.
Well, we can do that. Most likely it would be better to have like all in the range, so you have like one big dining room table. But what else? But so that's what we're doing. So basically that's your requirement and what I'm going to bring to this sort of thing. Now, here's what we're going to do with this. It's not just having tea. There's kind of a little experiment running with this. I'm going to have you guys tomorrow read over the articles on Victorian etiquette. They're taken from the Victorian etiquette books. And you guys have to choose 5 rules to follow. I'm going to give you 2. The first one is you cannot use contractions in conversation. Cannot, would not, should not, could not. Can't say that.
Cannot say can.
Exactly. The second is you must use proper language the entire time. And I don't mean like you can't say curse words, that's a given. I mean, you must speak properly as if you would to your grandmother.
I call my grandma Bud, so.
So, someone that you respect more than your grandmother.
My grandma calls everybody Bud.
So, here's the dealio. No informal language, no slang words, none of that. Also, you actually have to talk to each other. Because what happens when I generally throw those two rules down, people just kind of be like,
But we have food, how can we talk?
you must do so polite.
But everybody's bringing like 14 things. Let's not get lunch, we can eat all of it.
You seem to remember that I told you not to do that?
Okay, but everybody's gonna do it because they're gonna say, what can I do?
There will be, I promise you. It's a group of teenage girls, they'll be on the video. I always said leftovers. Maybe you guys are the first one that doesn't. But here's the deal. You know, you're not just going to be like, sit down and mow down constantly. It's not like you're going to have a bean bag. You're going to solidly pass out. It's a meal. It's other people during the meal. You have to be so polite. Yes?
We go to that British accent.
Yeah.
We can drink with our pinky.
Now, you can speak politely. And you can use diction, but that's not the same thing.
Should we cannot?
You may not. Because you all sound stupid. No, you don't. I promise you, you don't.
Do you have to drink with your pinky up?
Well, here's the thing. I gave you the two rules I'm giving you. You guys can decide on the other rules.
Pinky's up, guys. Pinky's up.
That can be
I already knew that.
Now that being said, that's probably the most over-exaggerated one. Basic manners and things like that need to be enforced. But otherwise, the specifics of rules are up to you. And the reason for this is because you guys will all be watching everybody else, and if they make a mistake, you're going to write it down. What we're emulating here is what was the most important Victorian ideal or value? One's So any rudeness, we're going to see how fast that's going to spread. It's an experiment. Well, you are because you're writing it down. Keep in mind, you grew up in a time where it is discouraged to gossip. It's discouraged to publicly shame someone. In Victorian society, a very real punishment I would probably enact to students because I was making to whoever in each class had the worst grade. My friend wasn't having everyone laugh at them and tell them how stupid they are.
What? You know how bad that sounds? How self-esteem.
The idea here is that one thing to avoid that, you would do better, yes? Have you guys heard of a dunce cap? It's a little pointy cap, it means stupid person cap. Exactly right. You see, public shaming was perfectly acceptable back then. So we're emulating that to some extent. Clearly, you're not telling anybody else who you notice things that you're going to tell me because I'm going to sheets once you're done. That is a rule we've enacted at one point where you have to be only that polite.
I don't get laughed. I will keep my hands. They don't make me laugh more.
So, I'm just saying, you guys get to pick the rules. I'm giving you only two. I already did. You already see that I'm picking. Beyond that, it's up to you.
Wait, I thought you said that we had to pick 5. Like,
You do.
oh,
So it's a total of 7.
Okay, what were you calling it?
You may not use contractions.
What's a contraction?
Can, that's when you take two words and jam them together. So like cannot becomes can't. Should not becomes should. What? No combination words, that's what a contraction is. And then secondly, you must, use proper language.
What's proper language?
It means speaking to someone with great respect and dignity. So, for instance, how you would speak to someone you're trying to impress. Think about this. You're essentially trying to impress everyone in the room with your good manners and good breeding and good distinction, good education. Right? You make any mistakes.
I don't know why I was thinking of a meeting here. No, I really don't. I swear.
Anyhow, this way, how would you speak to someone that you want to get a job with?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't speak rude, like, I feel like Prof was like, those like, really good people, like, and I don't know how to speak like that, but I wouldn't speak mean. I was
This way. Here's two different ways of speech. Saying that, well, why do you want a job here? Oh, I totally want a job here. It's so great to work. I'm so excited about it. As opposed to, I want to work here to further my career.
Okay, see, I wouldn't do this. Yeah, I don't. See, if I was given a job interview and I just heard that, then this person's a robot, they really don't want to work here. Other than that, I'm so excited.
See, that's why you're wrong. Because that type of person does not get hired. I can tell you because I used to be a boss.
Wait, what?
I was thinking, right?
You speak to someone clearly and with conviction. You guys are thinking, I want to have fun job. Your job isn't to have fun. Your job is to work and to go home. I don't care how happy you are. I care if you're productive.
You was Morse.
Now, this is because you're engaging in a business activity with this person. It's not about feel good or anything, but no one cares about that. It's a business. I'm giving you money and you're doing a job for me. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's all that matters. So that's where that really comes out.
That's gonna be a rough class.
It's going to be hard, but that's the point. Keep in mind, though, what is normal for you guys, what's normal for a Victorian person, are going to be incredibly different. You're raised in a different time period. So that's why it's going to be tricky. It's sort of a challenge, you know? It's like a game. You might be mad at it, but no, that's okay. I'm going to go to basketball.
I think that's gonna be my challenge in the email picture.
This is true.
Well, because we're emailing.
But here's the thing about guys also. Don't overly worry about that aspect of it with the speaking properly. I just really mean speak in a formal way. In essence, imagine you're at a funeral. Speak like you would the people.
So basically, don't lie.
Do we have to address people by their name, like Mr.?
I've already told you all the rules.
Okay.
Whichever ones you pick
Oh,
up.
no, that was like proper.
Like that,
No, I'm not going beyond those vague descriptions.
Oh, okay.
No, but that is a rule that we've incorporated before where you must refer to everyone by their last name. That's one that we've done in the past. There's a lot of options you guys have to choose from, so I'm letting you pick whichever five you think would be easiest. Like, you know, they're like, there's absolutely no way I can do the quiet laugh thing. You can choose not to. Just to be mean-spirited. That's hilarious. All right, anyways, that's that for that. Now, let's look at imperialism. Like I said, it's part of it. But one of the things you'll realize also, as you guys start writing this down, is interviewing is an art form whenever you're going for a job. And one of the tricks you have to learn is how to simply sell yourself in the best possible light for minimizing your negative aspects. Truthfulness is not what you want to do, you know, beyond what you have to. For instance, you can't lie about if you committed a felony or something like that. But if someone's like, you know, why do you want to work here? You know, because I have a passion to work at Toys R Us. That's my driving goal. I can't wait to do this. I mean,
I've had a passion working at McDonald's, but they never emailed me back.
I will say this. Most businesses I know, if you have a spelling error on an application, they just throw your application away. Yeah. Keep in mind, there's so many people who want to work for McDonald's, they can be choosy. Whenever it's a buyer's market, so to speak, when there's more people wanting jobs than there are jobs available, businesses can be really, really monetary. Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to go to parties.
There's parties around. Really?
Yeah, there's one right from my house.
Huh, fascinating. That's like Sonic. Like, I swear I've seen more closed Sonics than Sonics that are actually open. So let's talk about ruling a colony. So basically, the section you guys missed from Snow Day is all about the conquest of Africa. And what happened is the Europeans conquered it by first dividing it amongst themselves, because every European power wanted to go into the interior, and there was this fear that they would encounter each other and end up fighting a freaking war. So the idea was avoid war between the Europeans and instead divide and conquer Africa. So once the conquest happened, there were two main ways of ruling the colony. Number one was the British method, indirect rule. Essentially, the British would go into a place and they would sort of support a ruler who was African that was sympathetic to their needs and wants. They sort of manipulate the situation. If they couldn't find one, they would engineer one. They would make certain that somebody supported them by giving them weapons or troops or something like that. And as time went on, they effectively sort of pulled all the strings from the background. That's indirect method, not direct control. The French, you can probably guess, is not removed. They would literally go into a place and kill the king, anybody they had, and just take over. The French are in control. Furthermore, they would suppress anything that wasn't French culture pretty heavily. You don't see this as much in England, although certainly they definitely suppressed culture there. But in French, it was you spoke French. You're not allowed to speak African dialects, and they just completely took over. For example, that's spoken in war. Or the Ivory Coast. England's more, the southern part of South Africa. And essentially, these two methods differed by who was in control, whether it was the Africans themselves being supported by the British or being directly controlled. Now, needless to say, there was resistance to European conquest, and there were really three main ways, technically four. The fourth unmentioned way is by being controlled by the United States of America. There's actually two African nations that remained independent of European rule. The first was Liberia. Liberia was controlled by the United States. The idea was, at the end of the Civil War, what were we going to do with slaves? What were we going to do with the slaves? And many people in the United States, including Abraham Lincoln for a time, thought the best solution was to give the newly freed slaves a country of their own by shipping them back to Africa. The problem with that is these slaves weren't coming off the boats from Africa. They were born in the United States. They were American. Heck, some of their ancestors had been here for 300 years before the United States was a thing. So this idea of just moving them to another continent was not really popular. So the second country that remained independent was Ethiopia. We'll get to that here in a second, because their king was a dude named Menelik II, and he did some pretty cool stuff. Now, the Zulu, which was a tribe in South Africa, who we'll learn more about here in a bit, resisted the Europeans militarily. And actually, they had some pretty big successes. They ended up defeating not only the English, but the Boers, who were Dutch settlers, in a series of different wars that happened because of territory disputes and things like this. It's complicated. In essence, they succeeded in defeating the Europeans for a time. However, eventually, the English came in and wiped out the Zulu. That was largely due to political infighting within the Zulu nation itself, and ended up taking over the whole area. There was also religious resistance in the north of Africa based on religion, specifically Islamicism. You see, one of the major problems that the various kingdoms and tribes in Africa had is they did not unify against the Europeans. They were divided. And one of the ways that we can unify people was faith. In Islam, there's this idea of the ulama, which means the brotherhood and sisterhood of all Muslims. So if all Muslims are brothers and sisters, Who's the enemy that they're going to be fighting? The Christians coming in from the north. So the idea was this is a new crusade. It's us versus them. And so this us versus them mentality was going to help unify all of the Muslims against the Europeans. Now, it didn't quite work out that way, largely due to the fact that there was too much else going on in Africa. There's too many other conquests going on. So just in the northern part of Egypt with Britain, which is still had remnants of the Ottoman Empire, it didn't quite work out. But that was the idea, and here's the thing is, this unifying group was called the Islamic Brotherhood. Does that sound familiar to you? If you pay attention to the news, they're still around and still fighting, only different areas. It's the same mentality, which brings us back to the ideology some people have. Why do Muslims hate Americans? What do we ever do to them? Well, other than lots of things, it goes to the whole idea of the West, of Christianity versus Muslims. It's really all about power, us versus them. If we can unify all of us against the enemy, then we can have success and prosperity over the other people. Now, in some cases, this is against people within the same territory. For instance, you see the same thing happen in Rwanda, the same thing happen in Sudan. Well, in many cases, it's Muslims against other Muslims. It's just the wrong kind of Muslims. So, again, religious unification against the Europeans doesn't quite work out. Lastly, Melchizedek. He was able to do something very interesting. He unified Ethiopia politically. He was a pretty brilliant guy, and we're not really going to have time or energy enough to cover all of his various successes and achievements. But what it really boils down to is this. He was able to unify the people of Ethiopia and push them toward a common goal, which is essentially industrialization. He wanted to push this area to be more self-sufficient, to not have to worry about European technologies, and able to kind of meet their militaries by bringing in new technology from Europe. For instance, if you look at the armies of Africa, they were frequently using outdated firearms that are from 100 years ago. They used black powder and smoothbore muskets. By this point in European history, every soldier was armed with a rifle, which was breech-loaded and had a magazine that could only wear up to 50 bullets. And most weren't quite that large. Most only held about 20. But still, this meant that you could have a much more rapid rate of fire. A bolt-action or lethal-action rifle, like we have with the Henry Martini rifle or the Winchester repeating rifle, is able to increase rate of fire around 20 bullets per minute. Considering that a good musketeer can fire 3 bullets a minute and has less range, is a tremendous advantage for the rifle. In addition, around this time period, the very first true, fully automatic machine gun was developed by a German named Hero Max. This gun was able to produce a rate of fire equal to 600 bullets per minute. So take this thing, musketeer 3, rifle 20, machine gun 600. That makes 3 people, which is the crew of the machine gun, able to take on an entire army by themselves. Now that army is limited, the machine guns are limited by really 3 main things: weight, ammunition, and heat. You guys know friction, right? Heat causes those 2 things rubbing together. Well, when a bullet fires through a barrel, right, it's actually touching the inside of the barrel, so it's producing friction when it fires. If you fire 600 bullets in a minute, it's going to heat up that barrel so bad it can actually start to melt. So you have to actually tone it back a little bit. Or you can find creative ways to try to cool down the barrel. Early designs used basically a jacket made of kind of leather or rubber with water inside of it to cool the heat away from the barrel. They could also use venting to have the air circulate the heat out of it and cool the barrel down. But this rate of fire allowed for European nations that just dominate the Africans. Now that being said, Menelik bought some of these things and trained his men with their use of new modern weapons and new modern tactics. So when the Giants invaded, he just smacked them down. It's the only African nation outside Liberia that remains independent. And they're going to remain independent really until the invasion right before World War II by a combination of Italy and Germany. So this guy right here forever changes the history of Ethiopia. Now, that being said, a lot of the same problems that plague the rest of Africa is going to happen in Ethiopia, but that's later. One thing I will say is there's some kind of interesting stories about Menelik's rule. For instance, he really wanted electricity. He was fascinated by electricity. Electricity was super important in changing how people live their daily lives. If you think about it, electric lights allow us to stay up past the time the sun goes down. And is it the fire hazard? Well, it's not as bad as, say, kerosene or even natural gas. So it's kind of an amazing achievement. But one of the things he had heard about was a new method of executing prisoners guilty of capital crimes. Even better than the guillotine. The electric chair. Right? Strap someone in a chair, electrocute them, pull them out, problem solved. Yes? It's humane, it's civilized, it's wonderful. So, he ordered one to be made and shipped to Ethiopia, and oh my gosh, it was crazy expensive. He was really super excited about it, and they brought it and they unpacked it and said, here it is. And said, great, let's what next? Well, we need to hook it up. Hook it up to what? Hook it up to, electricity so it works. We don't have any electricity. Some assembly required. Couldn't set it up. So he looks at it and says, well, I paid so much for it. It's a really nice chair. Put it over there. I'm going to sit on it. And it became his throne. True story. Throne of Ethiopia, electric chair. For a little while. I think it was when it was Abyssinia. But still. It's still around, by the way. That's in it. I forget which museum it's in. You can go see the electric chair that was the throne. It's kind of fascinating. Anyways. Well, it's hooked up to electricity, so it's not just going to do anything to you. I think it's kind of funny because it's like, well, it's a nice chair and I paid a lot for it. Maybe like somebody having a lazy boy that they refuse to get rid of because they paid lots of money for 15 years ago.
I don't like playing with trees.
You what?
I don't like playing with trees with this too.
Okay.
You took it camping. I think so. We're planning to camping.
That's what it is. Anyways, there's three long-term effects of imperialism on Africa. Number one, the economy that was established in Africa was aimed at feeding raw materials back to Europe. And the problem is, when you're at the very bottom of the economic food chain, that means you get the least amount of money. That's not to say that Africa could not develop. It absolutely can, but that takes a lot of planning and a strong centralized government to make it work. And guess what they don't have? A strong centralized government. How well does our political parties get along and work together? We've had this discussion a few times, I feel. Not particularly well, do they? In fact, I've heard many people tell me that they like X candidate, but they can never vote for someone of that political party. Just think about that for a second. I think this person is the best person for the job, but I won't vote for them because I can't vote for that team. That is stupid. That is an asinine belief. That, frankly, is anti-democratic. The point of a democracy is to have differing ideals contributed so you can basically meet in the middle. Saying I refuse to meet in the middle isn't democratic. It's unrealistic. And think about it, that's a political party that hasn't existed in our country for more than not even a few hundred years. It's barely over 100 years in some cases. And actually, I think I'm over-exaggerating. I think it might only be like 80 years they existed. The political parties have shifted many times in the United States, and yet they're behaving in such a way like you'd imagine them being political enemies for thousands of years. If you look at countries in Africa, which were, again, by the Congress of Berlin, specifically set up with tribal enemies who had been fighting and killing each other for thousands of years, they make our problems look really tame by comparison. The only alternative in that situation is civil war, which brings us to political instability. The government isn't functioning the way it's supposed to, but add into this cultural upheaval. Remember, the Europeans went in and basically refused to allow these groups of people to practice their culture. So this meant that they had to try to effectively recover everything that was lost after the European conquests. I mean, think about this. Our knowledge of the history of Africa is severely limited. Much of Africa was frankly oral tradition based. They didn't write down their history. Those even that did were fairly limited. Think about ancient Egypt, for instance. All of our knowledge of ancient Egypt comes from their tombs. Yet, whenever I studied ancient Egypt in school, like in grade school, and we mentioned in high school, we almost always covered how they were a death-obsessed culture. How they were worried about preserving their souls and building pyramids and things like that. Gee, I wonder why that is when all of our knowledge of them comes from their tombs. I mean, think about how ludicrous that is. That would be like, for instance, if aliens were studying our culture and the only thing they had to judge it based upon was our television shows. You know, they'd assume that one free will is everyone's experience in high school.
Alien's pretty happy with that one.
Apparently everyone is beautiful and over the age of 20. No matter the 15. You know? It's completely unrealistic. In fact, the movie Galaxy Quest makes fun of that because a bunch of aliens are watching Star Trek essentially and think that's really what's happened. So they like come down here and like they steal William Shatner and make him their hero. And it's just preposterous. But it's that same mentality, you know? It doesn't make any sense. But add into that, even with our limited understanding, how much of that was repressed. You're not allowed to sing these songs. You're not allowed to tell these stories. Even though that's your history, we don't care. It's stupid. It's told you got to be European. So they essentially erase these people's culture, but while doing so, erase their history. So now, when we try to reconstruct what happened, our resources are incredibly limited. Make sense? Okay. So, that's it for that section. You have a quiz tomorrow on this section and section 1, which is the one you guys did on Soda. Make sure you have all that stuff. So, do tonight, if you haven't done it already. Now, I'll show the video I'm going to show you. I have a video. Which is, again, extra history. It's that cartoon guys talking about history stuff because they do perfect videos, apparently. Because literally every time I check for new ones, it's like, I'm covering that tomorrow. I guess I'm showing